What's up, everyone? Welcome to the 13th episode of Super Brain Radio. At least that's what I think it is. I'm still not positive. I'm not sure what it is, but something about passing that 10th episode, I just haven't been able to keep it, mentally in line. I have the numbers in front of me. It is what it is. Once I start talking, I tend to go into this flow state. I kind of black out. I forget everything I'm saying, but I know it goes well because of the way I set things up. And ironically enough, I'm going to bring this back up when we talk about the frontal cortex in the future. We talk about flow states, but today we're talking about the amygdala. It's a little bit different. So, I actually want to start with some stories, especially two specific ones, and how it relates to the concept of endure and what that means to us in this chapter. We have one episode left in this chapter as well, so keep that in mind because there's going to be a follow up episode, obviously, to this amygdala one to tie it all together before we go over protocols for enduring life, enduring sports, enduring whatever it is you want to endure. The first one being old people actually aren't the types of people that stop caring. It's really funny and or not funny. But what's going on when you see an elderly person kind of lack this ability to have social cues, to maybe be polite in a scenario, or they just say something totally off the wall. It's simply not that, like I said, they stopped caring. And in this specific sense, they're actually having frontal cortex degradation, having some slight memory degradation, and having dopamine degradation over time. This is a perfectly normal part of aging. However, the brain center that gains the baton in this relay race, as we see degradation of what we'll call their social cortices, is the amygdala. And what it becomes then is a paradox where it's not that they are caring less, becoming rude, or jaded by life, or whatever excuse you may come up with, they're actually using the wrong brain center. And what we can see is when we extrapolate that and compare it with children, it's exactly the same. If you see a child go through something that didn't go their way, or maybe they just stubbed their toe, they're going to have an exacerbated response. They're going to lose their ability to reason. They're even going to get irritable if it's something that doesn't cause irritability. It's because the brain center that is being activated is extending behavioral strategies, hormones, creating memories that are somewhat improper for the scenario. So there's a dyssynchrony. And I really want that concept of synergy and dyssynchrony to be what you take away from this mini story to start. The second is, I believe it was The Alpinist, but I watched like a bunch of Netflix documentaries on people who climb mountains in short periods of time. And it was just like a binge watching thing I went through. But one in particular that my friend recommended to me, they showed a brain scan of an atypically fast, proficient, and just awesome climber. And when they looked at his brain, they assumed that they were going to see pure amygdala function as he was traversing these wild mountains, as he was doing all this crazy stuff in a short span of time. And what they found was there was essentially zero amygdala function. And what this story is telling us is that mastery and your ability to have decision making processes active is typically going to inhibit the amygdala. So now this begets the conversation of where does skill and amygdala function come into play? And it's funny, it's that it's really the intermediate portion of learning anything where you can gain something positive from your amygdala in the long term. So, for those of you that aren't really aware of what it is, haven't heard me speak about it before, or pretty much have only seen The Water Boy and remember that specific scene about the crocodile, your amygdala is far more sophisticated and has a much larger bandwidth than that. The reason I want to speak about this in an overarchingly positive tone is because the amygdala can easily be demonized because it goes along with anger, aggression, addiction. It can essentially bring out the worst parts in you at the wrong times. But just like this chapter in Door, we've all been through things in life that essentially punch you in the face, being put in a position where you have to overcome something that requires a little bit of grit, a little bit of edginess, whatever it may be. Or you could simply view it as every function and center of the brain has a reason, and every tool has an optimal task that it can complete better than other tools. And that's really the picture I'm trying to paint right here. So, it's not that aggression is necessarily an optimal behavior strategy, but when we look deeper into what the amygdala does, it's actually responsible for creating the most intense memories in our brain. And when we think about what's the purpose, as we've already spoken in a previous episode, of creating intense memories, it's that you have a better opportunity to deal with the world around you in the future. And that's kind of what we're getting at here. So let's quickly circle back to skill attainment, whatever it is. If you're a novice, you don't really need too much amygdala, and if you do, it's actually just going to be in that memory formation process. But things are so novel, you have all these other protein-based ligands, to just be specific about what they are, or we can just put them in quotes as we did last week with hormones. We have all these specific things being secreted that are going to make the very first portions of skill attainment essentially easy. If you've ever done something once and thought you sucked at it, the best way to feel better about yourself is do it again in 1 or 2 days, and you'll be infinitely better. That's that novice paradox. And I kind of already mentioned that elite paradox, but to review it one more time, being elite at anything allows you to have differentiation between skills and decision making. Meaning, let's say it's golf, something incredibly specific. The best golfers can tell the difference between a good swing and a bad swing, even if it's the most minute thing that you can't even pick up on a video. They can even tell you the difference between the noise the ball makes. That's incredible ability and an obvious showcase of mastered skill. So when you get there, you actually more likely need a quiet brain, and even more likely need your five senses to be incredibly active while your decision making processes are active. We can't do that with an amygdala turned on. So what that leaves out is the intermediates. And I've seen this through coaching. I've seen this through becoming an intermediate in sports and things myself. I'm certainly somewhat of a novice intermediate in golf right now. I can feel my amygdala being active. That makes me worse at golf and is frustrating. And that's why everyone goes through the same issues. But the point is, if you have this base of skill, that's not necessarily very refined, but does exist in your hippocampus. You can't necessarily expand that without hormones, without some intensity to make that red hot neuron get even hotter, and all the above. So, as an intermediate, there is positive function that can come from facilitating an amygdala. Now, this comes with responsibility and this comes with assessment. So, what that means is one, responsibility. The second and third order actions of chronic amygdala usage, as you'll see in the PDF document to go along with this episode, does have some heavy issues. Now, chronic being the key term. And what I mean as chronic is, it doesn't mean that you use it every time you do the thing. More importantly, what I mean is you use it all day long over and over again. Now, not only is that bad because you're using the same brain center literally all day long, more importantly, it's novelty that allows us to improve at things. So if you want to use your amygdala for, let's say, lifting weights and becoming a better athlete, you should probably try to avoid using it as much as possible in the outside world and vice versa. If you're going through a really tough time in life and you're really enduring something that's chronically punching you in the face, putting your face in the mud, whatever it is, you should probably try to use a little bit of that amygdala to reverse some of those habits and then try to be as calm and anti-amygdala as possible when you can. It's that dichotomy that really allows change here. Now, responsibility, you guys have heard me talk about it tons of times. It's not that it's lame, but that really comes down to morals, values, and perfect segue here, assessment. So let's kind of go back to me sucking at golf. Let's say I want to acutely improve at golf, and I know I need a little bit of amygdala function just to get by, but it's a really, really slippery slope in golf, especially. What we need to do now is monitor your oxygen, your heart rate, and your thoughts. So, what we want to do is reaffirm success, potentially with the amygdala here, by actually maybe a small celebration, some praise that comes from you and is intense. It could be as simple as in between your ears going, "Oh, hell yeah." Or it could be a full celebration. That doesn't matter. But what does matter is assessing how we want to reaffirm success through the amygdala, and more importantly, looking at what's going to be successful when we look at the task at hand. So, quickly going back to that golf analogy, if I want to be really good at, let's say, putting, that amygdala function and level of success is going to be lower than maybe if I'm at a wedge or have to make a decision in the middle of the field that is going to require me dealing with nerves. And we can extrapolate this even greater. And you guys have heard me talk about assessments plenty of times. So now let's say maybe that you're in this indoor phase of life or sport, and you're starting to look a little bit more specifically at how can I get better at this? Take a moment to look at, well, what behaviors are going to be exemplified and manifested if I am successful at this? And if it's something slightly edgy, slightly excitatory, slightly sympathetic, meaning your heart rate's probably above 100 or near it, then the amygdala is probably going to be a good choice. Now, there's a couple of last little pieces I want to cover related to the amygdala, some having to do with the perils of overuse, and a little bit of science to kind of tie it all together. It's very, very important to recognize what you're associating your amygdala with in the first place. So, as you move towards mastery, we need to put the brakes on the amygdala to allow decision making to flourish. Furthermore, we want to start looking into acutely what things can the amygdala actually facilitate, and what things do we only need some hormones in our blood for. Right now, it might not seem very different, but as I explain it in the next minute or two, it's going to be a world of difference. So last week, we talked about testing dopamine and norepinephrine. You want a little bump of those two? Sure, an amygdala may help, but it doesn't have to happen. It's also 2022, so you just take a supplement that enhances those, and you don't even need to secrete it yourself. It could be a coffee, it could be carnitine, it could be plenty of things. Hell, it could even be a nootropic. Amoxicillin is going to have some light dopamine support. So, if you look at the behaviors of what you want, and it's really just low levels or moderate levels of excitation, but doesn't necessarily correlate with behaviors, actual manifestations of action and movement that are edgy, aggressive, whatever, what have you, then we actually don't need to promote amygdala function as much. However, what if it's the opposite? Let's say maybe you're running the 800-meter relay, and that is not a fun race due to the lack of oxygen, due to the distance to speed ratios to be successful. All the above, those involve a lot of overcoming your body's safety signals and actually needing to be a bit aggressive just to be successful. Those are behaviors I'm talking about. Maybe you're a fighter. Maybe getting punched in the face is actually sport for you. We need to now recognize that these are the behaviors and the brain center that are actually potentially beneficial for you. And that's separate from what's in your blood at the time. Let's even make it as reductionist as the stuff in your blood is simply rate and duration of time that you want to be active, and the actual brain center being used is the operating software for what's going to happen behaviorally. So to kind of review that one more time, let's say you are a fighter and it's an easy practice. Maybe not easy in the sense of, oh, I'm not going to sweat or anything, but easy in the sense of there's no intense skill refinement, there's no overcoming something insanely difficult that day. We still need the amygdala because it's actually successful in sports. However, we probably want lower levels of facilitating and synergistic hormones to not make it too intense and to not enhance the memory functions of this too much. What we want to do is pick with as much specificity as possible how much amygdala and how much hormones we want to get to where we want to go. So as we kind of begin to summate this opportunity to have a proper assessment and decide what you want, you need to start looking at the greater picture. Start playing second and third order action chess. And this is going to move us into the perils portion. As powerful as your amygdala may be, there are obviously perils with all power. I believe it was Spider-Man that said, with great power comes great responsibility. And I feel like that's very, very appropriate for this episode. Your amygdala, when it's chronically active 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for years on end potentially, you can run into thyroid, pancreas, liver and kidney issues, blood pressure, actual cardiac functionality, and stroke and myocardial infarction risk or heart attack risk. All of these things are going to be products of chronically being not just overstimulated, but sending brain signals that overstimulated is good. Furthermore, this is actually the brain center that is ultimately responsible for addictions, for having improper behavior strategies come out at improper times. So maybe you just find an aggressive response in relation to family, doing something intimate with a loved one, or even just trying to relax. These are products of behavioral associations and memories that you've actually trained over time. So, in a funny, not funny way, it's actually not the amygdala's fault that it's chronically overused and you end up with some health ailments. It's your fault because you actively made this decision to associate success related to the two and train that memory system to be enhanced related to that over time. So, the funny part is, this brain center, like I kind of mentioned, is going to be really active and important during the bookends of life. If you're a maturing child or an elderly adult, there's a really, really important function for the amygdala for actually kind of keeping things going. As a kid, this is setting up your hormonal structures and your hippocampus to be potent in the first place. As an elderly adult, this is attaining vitality, decreasing muscle loss, and allowing your body to still feel like it's something that you can actually live in. Ultimately, now what we're boiling it down to is looking at the behaviors in your life, associating and making assessments for success related to them, and then at the end of the day, deciding if that's something you want to continue going forward with. If you can just make an opportunity for yourself to stop, think, assess, and pick and choose what's right for you in the acute moment and what you're willing to reaffirm over time, then it's far less likely that you end up in a position where, man, my heart is racing whenever I do X, and I actually don't like that. It's not random, and it's not something that's just going to be happening. More importantly, it's going to be something that you are actually facilitating. Remember that the power is always in your hands and that you are ultimately the driver of what brain center is active.